Have you ever wondered how to cook duck breast to perfection? There's a lot of videos out there showing you the fundamentals, but I want to show you how to up your game. So I'm going to show you 2 ways to cook duck breast, and we're going to dry brine ours overnight. So we're going to start by making our dry brine mixture. This is where you have the opportunity to be incredibly creative. What's important here is the ratios, and we'll be working with about a 2-to-1 ratio of salt to herbs and spices. For our salt specifically, we want to use a smaller grain here. Today, we're using fine sea salt, but if you're using anything smaller and using a measuring spoon as opposed to a scale, you may want to use a little bit less salt or adjust your ratios, maybe closer to a 2 to 1.5. For our herbs and spice mixture today, we're using a combination of thyme, fennel seeds, cardamom, coriander seeds, ginger, garlic, and pink peppercorns. But as mentioned, this is where you have the opportunity to be incredibly creative, so here's a few additional blends for you to try out. Speaking of creativity, I'm eyeballing the measurements for all our herbs and spices here. It's netting out to about 2 grams each, but I didn't come into this with that already decided. I thought about what flavors I wanted to stand out most or least and adjusted accordingly. Some of our spices need to be grinded, so we measured and grinded them first before going in with our powders. We can now give this a good mix with our salt. We can now prepare our duck. We first want to pat the skin and the surface dry. Next, we'll score the skin against the grain. This is to shorten the muscle fibers to create a more tender bite, since we'll be using these score marks as guides to cut our duck into pieces once cooked. We're only scoring the surface of the skin, though your choice of pattern here. You can go for a single cross pattern against the grain or cross hatch the heck out of it. Next, we'll generously season both sides of our duck with our dry brine mixture, and then place them onto a cooling rack on a tray and let this sit uncovered in our fridge overnight or up to 48 hours. To serve with our duck, we're making a demi-glace. Now, this is an incredible reduction of a stock. In this case, we're using a really good duck stock that we previously made. If you don't have duck stock, feel free to use another stock here. But it's incredibly important to make sure that you're using unsalted stock here, because if we were to reduce salted stock, by the time we were done reducing it, it would be way too salty. We'll reduce our stock down till it's just about nothing, till it's thickened and glossy, and then we'll add a knob of butter, any aromatics, and a pinch of salt to finish. All right, it's been 24 hours, maybe 48 for you, and now it's time to cook our duck. We've removed our duck from the fridge, and as you can see, the surface is now darker than yesterday. The skin has also dried out, which is just what we want. We're first gonna brush off the excess herbs and spices on our duck, as we don't want these to burn when we go to cook it. For method 1, first let's preheat our oven to 200 degrees Celsius or 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Our duck is also still cold, so we can slow down how quickly it cooks internally. We'll place the duck skin side down in a cold oven-proof pan, turn it up to a medium-high heat, and render the fat from the skin till it's nice and crispy. This will take 5 to 6 minutes. We'll then flip our duck and place our pan in the oven. We'll cook our duck in the oven till it reaches an internal temp of 54 degrees Celsius, and then immediately remove and transfer it to a rack to rest. This may take 5 to 6 minutes in the oven. For method 2, we're going to sous vide our duck. Now this is definitely a more advanced technique that needs special equipment. A sous vide machine in this case, like this one. Now we're gonna pre-sear our duck here in a medium to high heat pan, but for less than half the time we did with method 1. We'll then give it a final sear once we finish sous viding. This simply means placing our duck into a freezer bag, letting out as much air as possible, and then cooking in a water bath at a set temperature. The advantage here is that we can completely control the cook temperature, as we'll be setting our sous vide machine to 54 degrees Celsius, meaning our duck can never cook beyond that point. An hour and a half later, we can remove our duck from our sous vide and let it rest for a few minutes. We'll then give it a quick sear for about a minute on each side, and then let it rest. So both our ducks are done. On the left, we have the one that we pan-seared and then placed in our oven. On the right, we have the one that we sous vide. We can see that the one that we pan-seared and then put in the oven actually shrunk quite a bit more than our other one. A little bit hard to see on the camera, but by my own eyes, it's definitely shrunk a little bit in comparison. So we've now let these rest for about 5 to 10 minutes. We're gonna cut into them, see if there's any noticeable differences. I think this one is going to be a little bit more cooked in terms of doneness compared to our sous vide, but we'll find out in a sec. So we've got a beautiful pink on this pan-seared, probably still a little bit more than I would like. This is the one thing with pan searing, the temperature can kind of climb so incredibly quickly. It's a little bit harder to control. And this is where sous vide really has the advantage. So let's go ahead and cut into our sous vide duck. So if we're comparing this here, a little bit hard to see on the camera, but we've got a little bit more of a gray banding here on the pan-seared one, as you can see, compared to the sous vide. So we get a much more even cook throughout, but both of these are cooked to the same temperature. Super excited to get into these. So that's 2 ways to cook duck breast. Whether you're pan-searing and finishing the oven or using the sous vide method, you can now enjoy this luscious dish at home. One thing to note, if you're using the pan-sear method, be cautious of how quickly you can overcook it. If anything, aim for about 5 degrees lower than your preferred doneness, as it'll continue to cook and come up in temperature by a few degrees while it rests. Lastly, don't forget to drizzle your demi-glace and enjoy.